Thanks for tuning in to the Mission Matters podcast, where we feature successful, mission-driven leaders committed to creating a positive change in the world. Our mission with this channel is to inspire other leaders by providing industry insights, new ideas, and inspiring stories from the pros.
Alrighty, hello, I'm Paul Fife of Paul Gregory Media, host of this podcast where I talk with leaders heading up mission-focused organizations, always leading from the heart, inspiring others and making a difference in our communities. This episode is sponsored by Paul Gregory Media, also a B Corporation. To know what a B Corporation is or what Paul Gregory Media does, go to paulgregorymedia.com. I always want to say .com. It was like the first Yahoo commercial back in the day, right? I'm excited. I have with me today Shelley Taylor. She's the Executive Director for Catalyst of Educational Change, CEC for short, and a National Board Certified Teacher. And she has a book out there, which I found out a couple of years ago, called Game Plan, a playbook for developing winning professional learning communities, another acronym there, PLCs for short, at work. And she's been an educator going back, I thought it was 94, but she told me before this podcast that it goes back even further than that. So Shelley, thank you for joining us on this podcast. So glad to have you.
Thanks. I'm excited.
Yeah. Why don't you tell our listeners just about your journey and what brought you to, well, it wasn't always called Catalyst for Educational Change, was it?
No, yeah. So I'll start back. Yeah, Paul's right. I knew at a very early age that I wanted to be a teacher. So headstrong dove into the world of what that would mean to educate and support youth, and started with even teaching Sunday school, running park district programs, and then was lucky enough to start as a sixth grade science teacher of all things. And then moved into different positions within school systems. And all of this was in the Chicagoland area. So for my Chicagoland friends, understand that many times you move around to different experiences, different school districts. So I had different roles from classroom teacher, different grade levels, then did move into special education, have also been an instructional coach, worked on intervention programs, and then found myself at a bit of a crossroads where I was offered a position to work at a nonprofit. I'll be honest, at that time, I wasn't even sure what it meant to work at a nonprofit. I was really all about teaching and I knew school systems, and it was a bit of a leap of faith, I would say, to leave my comfortable teacher retirement system gig I had going and felt like that was the way to go, to jump into this thing called a nonprofit. Have been actually with the nonprofit for 11 years. Started in overseeing some teacher effectiveness programming, and then moved into some different leadership positions, and had the opportunity to then take over as executive director July 1 of 2020. And since then, I have done a lot of learning between that, including really did a deep dive in. I mentioned I had no idea what it meant to be in a nonprofit. And part of my journey was to learn about nonprofit management, nonprofit leadership, and how that is different. And I'm, really proud of sort of both of those career trajectories. Now, the Catalyst for Educational Change, there's a sweet alignment here, because what we do at Catalyst for Educational Change is we work on collective solutions and innovations for school systems. And what I mean by collective is that we really work with school boards, the administration, and the teacher unions collaboratively to say, we're going to make change, whether that be for innovation or for transformation, in a way where we do it together versus doing things to the system. So certainly my background really is a nice complement to what we offer. And CEC originally has been around for about 38 years, but I know Paul and I will get into this, but CEC definitely has a new name. And I have, I guess, had the opportunity to really do a lot of change within this older nonprofit organization.
I love the fact that it's collaborative and it's not just trying to change an organization from the outside, right? So if we were to say in a nutshell what Catalyst for Educational Change was, what's the 30-second elevator speech for that?
Yeah, so we work on essentially change management in the system of education. And certainly, and we work both mainly in public, but not not exclusive. So we can also work in private or charter institutions as well. But it's really a focus on change management. I always say that we are experts in implementation. Anyone out there who knows anything about working in the school systems, they're not shy of good ideas. There's lots of good ideas, and we can work on a lot of what's, like reading programs, math programs, where often things get implemented in ways that are hard to have sustainability is in how it's implemented. Often it's too fast. You don't have, this is the collaboration, you don't have all parties in agreement. You're going to start getting some backlash on certain things. And I always say all good ideas die on implementation. And our job is to come in and work and support what that plan might look like. And it can be around the different what's that the school systems are entertaining at the time.
It almost sounds like you have to be a little custom for each organization that you work with, and that, speed is not always the same across the board.
Yeah.
And that absorption rate. Okay. Well, I like that. What I'm really excited to talk about is in this role, it has not been a very smooth start for you. And because this is a podcast about leadership as well, and looking at things through a leadership lens, and a lot of executive directors are listening to this, and presidents of organizations. You had a very specific challenge when you became an executive director. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So when I took over, again, I'll name the date, and it should mean something. July 1 of 2020 was an interesting time in our country, but for CEC, it was even more of a challenge. Originally, well, I would say the many years prior to 2020, CEC had a blended funding strategy. Great. 3 key funding areas. One was we had that large founder who was funneling lots of good money into our organization. Yay. We had a second funding stream, which were federal entitlement agreements with the state of Illinois to do transformation in schools that were really 5-year agreements. So that provided, right, some staffing stability. And then we had the third area, which was really more annual contracts with school systems to do the work that we do. When I took over in 2020, we already knew this. So in 2019, we were aware of 2 of our funding streams completely going away. The funder, who we had grown very comfortable with the millions of dollars coming in, was completely going away. We had the.
You had like a year's notice for this?
We did,
which isn't a lot of time.
We had
millions of dollars,
and we had some trickle down, but for any nonprofit leaders out there, they know what I'm talking about. You get real comfortable, and you then all of a sudden it's staffing, right? We have a staffing issue, and then you have to start thinking about programming and how you're going to replace that, and how you're going to keep some of the things going. And that funder in particular, because it was a large funder, also really became one of the more important staffing pieces and focus pieces of the organization. And so it was hard. I mean, change is hard for a lot of people. People were having a hard time letting go of some of those things that had started to be built over, I think it was like 5 or 6 years that we had that grant. Then the state of Illinois also changed how they were doing some of the federal entitlement school transformation pieces, which then essentially threw a 5-year agreement into, you're going to have to just get the annual one-off contracts with school systems. So in other words, kind of pushed that away of like, we have this set staffing. Again, we had positions that were set for these grants. And then there was let's just get the one-off contracts with clients. So I will tell you, starting off, I already knew so the funding that we could count on was during the pandemic. The school systems, like, remember, I said we come in and work with unions, administrator, and school boards on improvement in their school systems. At that time, the only thing they could really focus on was safety and, things around the pandemic and all of that. So
let's just recap here for a second.
Not even
2/3 of your funding goes away. And then 1/3 that you have left, which is to go into the school systems and work on programming, the school systems weren't even concentrating on it because we all know in 2020, they were just really concerned about, how do we ensure safety? There was a lot of remote work. And so programming was not a concern. So
Right.
even that was not, so you really were starting from zero, I think.
Starting with, okay, we have nothing. Now, I will say, so like, how did I get through that? I'm sure was going to be the next thing. What did I really focus on? Is the one thing I did have going for me is number one, I was already in the organization, right? So I had been in the organization at this point 8 years, and I was aware of the assets. I was able to, in June of 2020, so I knew I was taking over, but before that, on July 1, I was able to then have us go through a 5-year strategic plan process. Really, and because of the pandemic, the blessing I had was I had the time. We weren't busy doing work in the field. Everything was shut down. So I had the think time and the conversation time, really brought in some important folks to give us feedback on where we needed to go. Everyone was very aware of our context and situation, and was able to craft in June of 2020 what I think has been a really great 5-year strategic plan for the organization to essentially completely rebuild. And that at least gave me a roadmap. So I had the roadmap. So then when I started taking over, I continued. Again, we were shut down for a lot longer than people were anticipating. I did have the opportunity to get, and there's a ton of free, very good resources out there for nonprofits, really been able to tap those to help me figure out who are we, and had to go back to those key nonprofit pieces. What is our mission? Why does it matter? And how are we going to just keep pushing forward on that? And I think that was something that, at least during this challenge, we were able to get through that. My board, I will say I have redone absolutely everything, including governance. My new board that I have right now, we really set some key targets, especially around, we're lucky enough in our years of those big funds that we had coming in to put reserves away. And the goal was not to touch more than 10% of the reserves. I'm super proud to say I've touched 0% of our reserves. So we have been able to get through that. And that is a big deal, even though I try to explain to folks, like, sometimes people want to talk about the health of your nonprofit is like, what's your current revenue? I'm proud to say, like, it doesn't look as big as it did a couple of years ago, but hey, gang, we're still here. That feels really good to me.
And not touching the reserves, your board's got to be proud of that. And, a lot of organizations, when your funding is gone, would sort of pack up, because one of the questions you ask, you had a couple of questions like, what do you do and why does it matter? Another question boards tend to ask is, if you were to go away, what difference would it make? Right. And that kind of answers how impactful the organization is. So you pretty much restructured this organization, and it was also kind of, nothing is good about the pandemic, but it did allow you to have that time to say, okay, we're not going to identify just with the grants that we have, because now we don't have much, right? We're going to now say, this is our mission, and then we're going to go after the grants that will support that mission. So I love that. And you did that at a time where you didn't even touch your reserves, which is pretty incredible, really.
Yeah. And part of that, I will say, is I had to really jump into, and it was really funny because one of my staff members even said, we got to jump into this financial piece. We had to really be looking at cash on hand, how we're closing some of our pieces. I mean, we really refined that business process that we had. I told you my journey. I started teaching, children to, like, now I have this, I don't have an MBA. I don't have this big financial background. So it was a lot of learning for me. I will say I did get, and this is a plug out here, I did get a mentor from the Small Business Association, which is free, which is great. And like I said, I really leaned on resources. So I knew I need to do this task. So when I said, I don't do finance, Shelley, I'm like, well, you do now. And so do I. So let's figure it out, and let's, figure out, put on our bootstraps, and let's get her done. And that's exactly what we kind of took, that attitude of all of these challenges, we can find the right solutions. I'm going to be honest about what the limitations of my understanding of it is. And I'm going to bring in smart people and source smart people, often at a pro bono type piece, to figure some of those things out. I did decide, right, where I'm going to invest. I got a corporate attorney and invested in that because we had to redo bylaws, am I doing following this process and all of these pieces. So some things I made sure to follow along, but I had a lot of resources to help me think about it. But yeah, one of the biggest things was, and the funniest thing is we're actually, I think, financially healthier now because we have such tight financial processes and we actually have data that we're using to make decisions around. Whereas I remember the years when we were waiting for the $1 million check to come in from the funder, literally, like, when is the $1 million check coming? And we were liquidating our stocks and bonds because we couldn't make payroll. Now, on paper, it looked like money was coming in, but we didn't actually have payroll money to make payroll. We're at that place where, I'm constantly looking at how many months out we have cash on hand. And that's like the biggest focus is how much cash on hand do we have? How much cash on hand do we have? So part of that was just sort of getting that accounting processes in place and all of that. That really, really helped big time for us to not tap those reserves at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bane of every small business, right? Nonprofit or for profit, right? Is how much cash you have on hand and how many months can you make payroll?
Yeah.
And the shorter that time frame, the more you have to work at sustaining that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So you've kind of emerged on the other side of this, Shelley. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I don't know if you can recall or want to recall offhand. You mentioned a lot of resources that you relied on, and one of them was the Small Business Association. One of them was relying or investing in a corporate attorney. Any others that you could share?
Yeah, I sourced some pro bono support. I use Taproot quite a bit, and Taproot has done some really nice work with nonprofits, including sometimes they have organized ones, and then sometimes they're sort of like one-off things. So I've done a lot with that. I did lean heavily into Northwestern has a relationship with Allstate, and they have a nonprofit leadership portal. But then I went through, I think it's one of their programs that it was like a 6 or 8 week program, all online, but like learning about certain things. But you're also with other nonprofit leaders. So you do have sort of some interaction with other nonprofit leaders, which is really nice. Also Forefront. I would say Forefront in Illinois in particular. We joined as a member, but then there's also some services that they have there. Some information pieces. Their librarian and their library is amazing. So like, for example, I wanted samples of licensing agreements or different contracts. And all you have to do is have a conversation with the librarian, and then she sends you cajillions of links and you can go through it. So, I mean, those I think were the ones that were most important to me. And then I did join other networks of educational leaders, executive directors. So also educational leaders, but executive directors in different fields besides myself, because I also learned from others on, okay, we're not in the same sector, but we have the same challenges. And I think that really helped a lot. So DuPage County in particular had an ED network, and I joined that, which was really helpful. And I could hear their perspectives, like especially when I redid my whole governance structure and I had to put in like a give-get for my board, which was never there. I just remember some like little sayings from like the executive director from the Boy Scouts, like, oh, hey, I got to remember that one and write that down. And so like those would be just the little pieces that really kind of brought me into folding in the different resources that I needed.
That is awesome. And the executive director network, who's that with through?
That's it's Giving DuPage.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And they had a relationship with, I think, NIU for classes as well.
Yeah. And I took one of those actually. And the person who was doing that I ended up hiring her as an HR consultant to help us redo one of the things that this is also on top of. If you thought things were bad for me in July of 2020, then when I talked to the HR attorney and she said, oh, yeah, all of your staffing is not really following current fair labor standards. So you're going to probably need to redo everything. We recommend just terminating everyone and rehiring and doing a whole new. And I mean, I said, I need a month. I was like, okay. So really was able to help work through that. But yeah, we ended up redoing all job descriptions, an entire new handbook. I mean, everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we do
Hmm.
accentuate those two organizations, Giving DuPage.
Yeah.
And that's awesome that you took advantage of those resources and the executive director network, which I loved, and the partnership they had with NIU. You took a class there, but also Forefront, who
Yeah.
has just resources that are knee deep, and also an excellent organization. Actually, we just became a member there as well,
Mhm.
as an advisor. And adjacent to them is the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits,
Mm.
who relies on Forefront very much, and
Mhm.
they're a great organization in the Illinois area.
Yep.
Um, uh, if you ever need a consultant in any area in operations or operational efficiency or organizational development or development of grants,
Mhm.
they have a lot of great consultants who I've gotten to know over the years as well.
Yep. Yep.
So great organizations. I'm really glad to see that you took advantage of those. And then look at you now, right? That's you're on the other side, but you're on the
Yeah.
tail end right now of this
Yeah.
5-year strategic plan, right?
Yeah, so we're and just finishing up our fourth year. We're starting our fifth year of that strategic plan, and really getting ready. In your fifth year, we're ramping up to get our next strategic plan started, including, I would say, Forefront has, this is another plug for them,
Yeah.
an assessment there. It's called the ICAT. So we're actually using that because what ICAT does, it also says you may have this great idea, nonprofit, but do you actually have the capacity to execute on it? And I want to mention that a little bit. And Paul, you and I talked about this before, is that the growth and scale. One of the things I have resisted is growing too fast, too big, because then you start to lose the mission again. And if people aren't with you and your organization isn't ready for that growth, my fear is I'm going to find myself right back where I was July 1 of 2020, which is this is just a big mess. People don't know what we do. It's a lot of restructuring. So the ICAT we're using to help ourselves, the board, and everyone give feedback on what we think our capacity for scale is. But I'm super excited because I just cannot wait for the next strategic plan. It's really been my roadmap in these last couple years. I'm so excited for us to be into that scale and growth phase, because there's just been so much that we've done. And now it's just a matter of how we're getting to that next step. But I have taken it slow because I want to make sure that it sits a little bit too. We do a lot of this transformation in school systems. I always say, we should practice what we preach. Slow and steady wins the race. Okay.
So scale and growth, but carefully,
Yeah.
right? And strategically and purposefully.
Yeah.
Which is a good note. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much the future of the organization, is scaling growth at a very strategic rate.
Yep.
That's excellent. You do see organizations that scale and figure out how to backfill the resources afterwards, right? And they sometimes get into trouble. So yeah, kudos to you for that. For that strategic plan. Um, I think you've said it all. I mean, you're really like the living success story of CEC really these days, but also a lot of the lessons that you've learned and found resources on translate to just about any other nonprofit that I could think of. And there's a lot of lessons there. So I love that. Any parting thoughts for our listeners?
Just that I think for a nonprofit leader, I'll just stick with that. In any situation, I
Yeah.
feel like you're always thrown, especially small nonprofits, you're constantly wearing multiple hats. And I feel like I call it get stuck in the whirlwind of there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
One of the other thing that I think really helped me, and just to think about as educational leaders and executive directors, is to really have for yourself a couple core either principles or value statements or what guides you. And I'll tell you, I leave it on a little post-it note on my workspace over here. And I can look at it from time to time because so many times I get off course. And even over these 4 years, I would be like, oh, okay, I'm off course again. Let me get back on course. But I have set those as like my mantras, or these are the things I really want to focus on. So when those times, because it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, oh, it's going to happen. So have a plan to put yourself back into what you know is what you need to do as the leader of your organization to kind of right yourself as you're kind of navigating the choppy waters that are called running a nonprofit.
I like that, especially having something, either a Post-it note or a poster or whatever by your desk, right? Because oftentimes what I see, and I've worked with a lot of nonprofits over 18 years, a little bit of panic can sometimes set in when you're off course.
Here's my favorite. So I'm going to share. This is my favorite one, and I'm reading it, okay? Because sometimes I have to read it. And it's this idea, the concept of I had to resist jumping into things that take me off mission just for the money, right? Because remember, we were in a cash flow, like, what's going to happen? And so the one that is been up here for 4 years is, what is the bigger yes that the no creates space for? Ooh. So this idea of what's my big yes, because that's what I'm shooting for, which is why I'm saying no to this one here. And so that one I just keep, and when things come up, I have to go, that's a no, because I have a bigger yes that's going to actually be that longer game. I'm playing a long game. I'm not playing a short game.
Right. That's a great strategic message and a very succinct saying. I like that. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there you have it. Shelley Taylor, who emerged on the other side, educator extraordinaire, but even more important, a lot of lessons learned, I guess, in the last 4 years in the nonprofit space that I think a lot of others could learn from.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I appreciate your time too, and the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Till next time, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Mission Matters podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.